Sort of starting at the south and working our way north, we first sort of studied the U.S. Steel site itself. And when we looked at the historic U.S. Steel site, which is everything colored, what we found out pretty quickly is that the site had been sold in pieces already. The south pink color, which is sort of pie shape, is actually owned by the Gateway folks out of, I think, St. Louis. It looks terrible from the outside. I mean, if you drive by it, that's sort of an ugly old building. But what we found out was it was a very vibrant, well-used business. That facility is rather unique. Although you see a lot of industrial space around your region, you don't see a lot of very high ceiling crane served space. That's rather unique, and that's what that space is. And as a result, in talking to Gateway people, their business is good. They have no plans to go away. The facility suits them perfectly. And so from a redevelopment standpoint, it probably would be hard to displace them. But in addition, their piece, both on the east and the west sides, are bordered by active rail lines. Their access is a very little access over here on the south end. But if you tried to redevelop this, it's probably going to want to be an industrial use anyways, just because of the configuration of the site. So we discounted trying to involve them in a larger redevelopment effort. We also, as we looked at the pieces that were sold on the north, the green, the purple, and the blue pieces, again, they have very active businesses. They appear to be doing very well. There's J.H. Fox on the north that makes light poles on the interstates. There's a landscaper in here, seems to be doing well in business in a rather recently constructed banquet hall. And so as we looked at it, we really didn't feel there was going to be a constructive way to try and involve them in a greater redevelopment. It really started to focus us in on the remaining, I think it's 50 acres, give or take, that is currently owned by U.S. Steel, which is in the light blue. So we really sort of focused just on the piece that U.S. Steel currently owns. We were not granted access to the site, but we were granted access to talk to some of the U.S. Steel folks. They were fairly candid with us about what they thought the redevelopment of the site might look like. They stated that they were working with the IEPA folks. The challenge they had in working with the IEPA folks wasn't necessarily, Jesus, that's what contaminated or not contaminated. They were trying to get on common ground with the IPA and just defining how you evaluate the site, how many samples you have to take and what sort of places and what the right levels of different things in the soil should or shouldn't be. And they were hoping to wrap up just a definition with the IPA of how you evaluate the site. Once they did that, they would then go ahead and actually conduct the evaluation, and they thought they'd be then in a better position to try and remediate the site. In talking to them, what we did find out, though, was that of all the structures in this 54 acres, the only really structure that is currently still viable is this sort of L-shaped structure. It's a big blue building. We just called it the blue building. It was actually built in the 1990s. It's a fairly recent building, although that facility's been there for well over 100, 150 years. The blue building is actually a fairly recent building, similar to the Gateway Business Center. It's a very high ceiling, was a crane served building, and it's a rather unique space in that you can't find a lot of that in the region. The rest of these buildings, basically, the consensus from U.S. Steel folks was that none of them were really viable or worth saving. They'd probably be demolished. There is also on the U.S. Steel site, right here, up in the corner on Collins Street, a historic limestone building, or at least we're calling it historic. I don't believe it's actually listed on the register. It has? Okay, thank you. But they're obviously sensitive to that. They want to see it preserved. So I don't think there's any plans for that to go away. They're very well aware of the history, and are looking for someone to want to step up and probably take ownership of it once they finish defining the greater environmental issues surrounding the site. So as far as existing conditions, that's what you've got. Again, site constraints. The site is rather deep. When you talk about retail, big box retail, probably 1,000, 1,100 feet is about the most depth you need. That site is actually about 1,400 feet deep. So it's actually a little bit too deep for some uses. You've got no hard corner. So from a retail standpoint, one of the lingo in the industry is a hard corner, or an intersection with a stoplight. It's a lot of traffic on all four legs of the intersection. So here you're mid-block on Collins Street. And as far as industrial uses, what we were hearing was that there's already a fair amount of truck traffic on Collins, and the neighborhood probably would not be receptive of a business use that greatly increased the amount of truck traffic on Collins. Moving on, we did some noodling, and this is what we came up with. And I have to apologize. Every slide you're looking at tonight, with the exception of this one, north is up. On this slide, north is to your left. So if you can, everything you were thinking, take this and sort of rotate it, clockwise, and you'd have north up. So this would be Collins Street running across the top of the slide right through here. This is the outline of the blue building. Our thought was that the neighborhood would really like to see retail. Retail is something that the neighborhood needs, although in looking at the overall site geography and constraints, it's probably not, I'm not going to say definitively not, but probably not a big box site. We looked at trying to figure out a way to increase the flow of people from the west side of the river over here if it was to become a big box site. And our bridge guys to look at it, and because of where the different rail lines are, on in this case, the bottom edge of the slide, you couldn't get a bridge to go up over the rail tracks with sufficient clearance and back down to the site and make it all work. And just, your bridge would have to go straight up and then straight down almost. So the geometry of it just was really tough. And so when we looked at it, we said, the neighborhood, when we talk to people, they really want neighborhood retail. They really, although everybody likes to talk about a super Target or a super Walmart or that sort of big box, what they really needed was a good basic grocer. There's a lot of specialty grocers in the area. And I should say one of the other comments that we heard was they didn't want to do anything to jeopardize all the small businesses which had popped up there. There's really been a great, thriving culture that's popped up along Collins Street. And so everybody wanted to make sure they got more retail. They didn't want to do anything that really jeopardized all those little mom and pop businesses that had popped up or seemed to be thriving along Collins Street. So we were thinking more on a grocer that's a 30,000 foot grocer. An example would be something like an Aldi, about that size. We heard a lot of comments about hardware. People, if they're in that neighborhood, they want to buy a hammer, they got to drive one way to buy a hammer. So, instead of thinking, Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, think more along the scale of an Ace. And so if we could get people thinking that sort of scale, we laid that out along the front. Now, what we did with the remainder of the site, now we, preserve some space for CVS, Walgreens type use maybe here. Our thought was you would extend the existing street grid from the east into the site. So this would be a street running down through here. And then also connect to the street to the north and connect into Gateway and down here eventually. What that would do is it would allow you to do light industrial in the back, probably not increase your truck traffic, still have a good viable use for the back end of the site with retail in front. On the odd chance that we're wrong, and we are wrong occasionally, that a big box retailer would like to go here, we think by the land plan we've shown you, you could lay out, these would be light industrial lots, but if a big box retailer wanted to come in, you could literally extend the site back into here and do a bigger box retail type development. And and then still use that extra depth. And you might as well be sort of deep back here for some light industrial. Oh, and then, you know, you could leave the blue building for now. It could be a viable use. You would encourage, you know, one thing I probably should have said at the beginning, this is U.S. Steel's property. You know, absent somebody stepping up saying they want to play, these are uses we think you should encourage U.S. Steel to see the site redeveloped as. And I think it's important that the city approach them and say, we want to be your partner in this. Not necessarily your financial partner, but your partner in success of having the project done. And so, you know, we think it's very important that in approaching them, you know, there may be some help that, you know, the municipality can provide as far as roads or utilities, but try to encourage them as a partner to do this type of development. Just again, as a recap, you know, try and encourage them to maybe sell that building, someone like a gateway type user that would continue to use it in the meantime. They could lay this out with a new road or two in here that would have some light industrial in the back and provide a great opportunity for retail in the front. That box right there is the old administration building, you know, and that looks like it shouldn't be too tough and difficult, too tough an assignment for someone to redevelop that into some type of office type space. That was it for the recommendations on U.S. Steel. Moving up to the prison site, it's going to go into the crown jewel of the actual prison itself. So we looked at the prison, and as you remember, there's 20 acres on the west side of Collins Street. There's 160 acres on the east side of Collins Street. They're really two totally different animals. Everybody talks about coming up with an idea for the prison property. Well, you know what? There isn't going to be one idea for the prison property. The sites are so different. Those two pieces are so different. Even within just, for instance, one part of the west side, you may have multiple uses. So what we are going to encourage you to do is think creatively on a lot of different pieces of how this can come together. And I'll walk you through the site constraints and our suggestions on the east side of Collins, the larger piece first. Then we'll drop back and we'll talk about what people typically think of as the prison site, the 20 acres on the west side. On the east side of Collins Street is, I think, Mr. Thanis was explaining, you've got a pistol range that's active, you've got a rail line that's active, you've got a couple of quarries, which is where the limestone from the prison itself was quarried out of. The prisoners actually, that's when you were in prison, you really had to react to this. It's not just a tour of the prison. When you think about what those cell blocks are, they're solid concrete and limestone walls. You're not going to find a building more fireproof than this. So when you talk about things like, you know, units of government needing secure file storage, needing places for data servers, for, you know, there's lots of things you could use it for that aren't necessarily dragging the general public in, but you can use the space instead of building facilities somewhere else. It's there, put it to work. And so that's plan B. You know, one thing we did say is, you know, you have to be mindful of parking, because with this you're going to start filling up the parking lot rather quick. And so at that point you can look at possibly, although Collins is a very busy street, creating some parking on the other side of Collins. Also, there may be a touch of excess land that one of the private property owners has just south of the correctional center site, so you may be able to acquire some additional land for parking down there. And then another thing I didn't mention on Development A that I think is really important, someone had the idea. The people who are either inmates at this prison or who work there are aging. They're aging rather rapidly. They're almost like, you know, we're losing out of our World War II vets. All the stories of that place are disappearing rapidly. And I think it's really something that the community should somehow inventory those stories. Someone should go out and interview those people. Take videos of them talking. Capture what that place was really about. Because, you know, we only got the tip of the iceberg. The stories we heard were phenomenal about, you know, how that place was built, how it was operated, and how it was absolutely gorgeous inside. Because, you know, Part of what the prisoners had to do was landscaping. You know what? We walk around now, and it's overgrown and pretty ugly. Back then, the stories we heard was, it was spotless, it was gorgeous. And we don't know that. So someone needs to go out and inventory that, archive it. In today's day of age of technology, it's easy to put that stuff up on a website and have it have a living history. So it's something to capture as well. Moving on. The third scenario, which gets a little more aggressive, is really the idea in the real thought of the third scenario came from a development that was recently done in Jeffersonville. There is an old infantry quartermaster's depot in Jeffersonville, Indiana. It's almost the exact same footprint as the 20 acres of the Joliet Correctional Center. And you can see this was the old depot. It used to be, all four walls, just like the Correctional Center. What they did to redevelop it was they opened up a big chunk of the wall to allow people to see in and get into the interior part of the site. They then used the perimeter walls to build retail development. So that's basically a shopping center around the inside. And that's actually the Jeffersonville, Indiana City Hall in the center. One thing we didn't like in looking at that, we really liked this concept, but what we didn't like was the huge expanse of pavement on the inside. And so the parking again becomes a challenge. You need to provide for parking, you need to probably provide for people getting in. And here's our take on it. What we would like to see is if you did that a little bit more green space in the center as opposed to a sea of parking lot in the center. But our thought is you probably had to open up a good chunk of the wall along Collins Street, provide access and visibility into the site. It's not enough just to have an access open wide enough for a car. You need to actually have access wide enough for people driving by. They see what's in there and it actually entices them to come in. But you would have the ability to then, build buildings along the walls, on the inside of the walls. You can still preserve the prison yard if you want. There was some discussion of a hotel, although we think, again, we've been wrong, but we don't believe there's probably a good hotel market for that specific location. But there's the ability to do this all along the way we talked about in the past, and then have bringing the interior retail type buildings and hopefully more of a graphic on the inside. Again, parking becomes a challenge. That's just something that it's got to be solved. It can be solved. It's just you got to figure out where you put it and try to do it in an intelligent manner. This third scenario, well, the others could probably be done in the private sector. I'm sorry, well, the other scenarios can be done in the public sector. The third scenario is probably going to be a private sector driven event. It's going to take a fair amount of subsidy because the cost of building a development new on a greenfield would be a fraction of what it would take to refit all this. So there would probably have to be some public subsidy, and it would probably have to be happening in a different economic time where those retail developers are a little bit more viable. Right now, that's a tough sell, unfortunately, where we're at in the economic cycle. So just to sort of summarize it all, first thing is, you got to grab the bull by the horns, get the state to stabilize this site, or somebody else has got to go in and take responsibility for stabilizing the site. Prison West, again, is deteriorating rapidly, and really it's a great historical asset. I don't think you really want to see it go away, and so it needs to be stabilized. There's various levels of redevelopment we've given you on the prison site. Just a basic level of restoration and use. We figured it was about $3.8 million. And again, these are rather rough numbers created over a 2-day working session. They're not real refined, but we're comfortable in giving it to you. It's just a ballpark. 3, the prison east grounds we think are really wonderful open space opportunities. Preserve the typical building, fence the railroad tracks to allow to use the stuff west of the tracks for recreational purposes. Explore partnerships to preserve, redesign, and connect the prison space with neighboring communities. One thing we didn't talk about, because it is a challenge, but it's something you shouldn't lose sight of, is how to connect all of these assets with the I&M Canal Trail. rail lines. You're gonna be hopping over like the bridges or tunnels, that, as you get into this effort, we couldn't really point our finger at one location and say connect here, because we need to see how these pieces are gonna develop. As you're developing, you wanna make sure you don't lose sight of the fact that these assets should really be connected so that they really get maximized. And close an additional portion of Woodruff Road to allow safe passage from Cedar Sanchez Elementary School to the Oakland Ranch, just north of the school. With U.S. Steel, again, we want to stress that it's their property, it's private property, but you need to approach them in a spirit of cooperation and partnership, and try and encourage them to go ahead and actively keep redeveloping their property, and to do it in something where it becomes a great asset for your community. And get them to demolish the other buildings. We've got, as I mentioned, John Talty, Greg Terwilliger, John Mace, myself. We're all available for questions. We could maybe take a few questions now, and then we'll break, and feel free to just come and grab us before we leave tonight if you have other questions. So again, huge thanks to the city, Mayor Girani, and the elected officials and staff have been wonderful. The folks at CMAP did a lot of heavy lifting, all the background information we needed to sort of knit this thing together. It's really been a great cooperative effort, and I just can't stress enough how big of a help they were. Don't forget to sign the list if you want to get a copy of